Well, does anyone not have questions who needs them? I guess I should ask them. Everybody? Okay. So what's been going on last several chapters? What's the situation for Jesus?
Jesus was praying for himself and his disciples.
Yes. Yeah. And, well, we're just about, today we get to the arrest. But the last several chapters have all been that night before he gets arrested. And so he's been praying for himself, the disciples, he's been going through all this teaching. What is his priority on that night? What has his priority been in those last few hours?
That they know what's coming, even if they don't understand it. He's
Right.
telling them exactly what's going to happen to him, and what will happen to them.
Yes.
And that the Holy Spirit will come. Again, they don't understand that, but that will illuminate things for them.
Yes.
And we see that happen.
Yeah. What kinds of things has he told them about the crucifixion?
The world's going to get loud.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to mock him.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's not the end, because
Yeah.
this is all part of the plan of God. In fact, he tells them how he's going to end up getting betrayed, because he tells them one of them is going to betray him. Do you remember what, Peter was like, wherever you're going, I'll go. I'll even die with you. And what did Jesus say about Peter?
then you deny him.
Yep. Yeah. Peter's going to deny him 3 times. In fact, all of the disciples are going to abandon him before the night's over. But he keeps telling them over and over and over who's in control. He's in control. God is in control. It's going to look like Satan is in control, because to a certain extent, he's going to have his way over the next day. But everything Jesus keeps telling them is, he's the one who's in control. Nothing is happening that is outside of the purposes of God. And that's going to continue now as we come out of all that teaching and the prayer, and now we get back into the narrative. So now when Jesus gets arrested, that's going to be a huge thing that John keeps emphasizing through the next several chapters is, who's in control? God is in control. It doesn't look like it on the surface, but he is. And we're going to see it, not just in the big things that happen, but in the little details about how so many things are just going to fall into place exactly the way God intended. Okay, so let's look at John chapter 18. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side there was an olive grove, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the grove, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said, and Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Again he asked them, "Who is it you want?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." "I told you that I am he," Jesus answered. "If you are looking for me, then let these men go." This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. "I have not lost one of those you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it would be good if one man died for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. But Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. "You are not one of his disciples, are you?" the girl at the door asked Peter. He replied, "I am not." It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. "I have spoken openly to the world," Jesus replied. "I always taught in synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said." When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby struck him in the face. "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" he demanded. "If I have said something wrong," Jesus replied, "testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?" Then Annas sent him, still bound, to Caiaphas, the high priest. As Simon Peter stood warming himself, he was asked, "You are not one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it, saying, "I am not." One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. "Didn't I see you with him in the olive grove?" Again Peter denied it, and at that moment a rooster began to crow. Then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," the Jews objected. This happened so that the words Jesus had spoken, indicating the kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "It was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this reason I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" Pilate asked. With this he went out again to the Jews and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." Now Barabbas had taken part in a rebellion. Okay, so how does chapter 18 begin? Verses 1 to 3.
Going to the garden to pray, but it's interesting that John doesn't tell anything of that incident of Jesus
Right,
praying of
yeah.
his passion.
So all that stuff we know about the Garden of Gethsemane comes from the other gospel accounts, and John doesn't talk much about that, but he says, the place where they go, it's a garden or an olive grove, your translation might say, we know it's the Garden of Gethsemane, yeah. So they get there, and what happens?
Judas comes out with that detachment of soldiers.
Mhm. Yeah. And I wonder if you noticed that twice in 5 verses, John calls Judas the betrayer, like he's really sticking it to him. And, we already know this is what Judas headed out to do several chapters ago. But when Jesus goes to this place, when he goes to the garden, he goes to a place that's familiar, and he knows it. This is a place that Judas would know. Jesus isn't hiding himself. The hour has come, and Jesus isn't shrinking from it. He could have avoided the usual places that he goes if he wanted to stay away from Judas, but he is fully now headed toward the cross, and there's nothing about what he's doing that implies he's trying to avoid what's coming. So he goes to this place that's familiar, and when Judas shows up, he comes with a detachment of soldiers, and that word for a detachment or a band of soldiers refers to a group of Roman soldiers. So these are the Roman military people who come along with officials from the Sanhedrin, from the chief priests and the religious leaders. So it's a multicultural group that shows up to arrest Jesus. And how is it when they come at the end of chapter 3? What do they come with?
Lanterns, torches, and weapons.
Yeah, so lanterns and torches because it's at night. And why do you think they're coming with weapons?
They think that they're coming to a notorious criminal that they're going to have to chase around probably or something.
Why would they think that? Do you think?
They don't know.
Do the chief priests and the Pharisees not know who Jesus is and what he's about?
Well, he does keep sliding away. He gets away a lot, so they want to make sure he doesn't get away. And I think, too, that despite the fact that they know he's always been peaceful, he did turn things over in the temple courtyards, but he's never been armed. He didn't come into the city on a horse or anything. I think they're still expecting there's going to be a fight right here. That if they try to arrest him, there's going to be some kind of a battle. And maybe, there's going to be a sort of revolutionary upheaval when they do what they're about to do. Mm-hmm. But they come armed as if Jesus is leading a rebellion, which he's never actually been doing.
The fact that this takes place in this garden is so interesting. I heard a pastor say once that the story of the Bible is like the story of two gardens. So the first one, in the first garden, there's a man who's told to obey God about the tree and he will live. And instead he disobeys and he dies, and everyone who comes after him dies too. But in the second garden, there's a man who is told to obey God about the tree and he will die. And he does it. And everyone who follows after him lives. This is the reversal of the Garden of Eden. What happens here is what reverses what Adam did. You know, when you think about the way Paul describes Jesus as the second Adam, that's right, because Jesus is about to do everything Adam didn't. He's about to undo. He's starting the undoing, I should say. He's starting the unraveling of everything that Adam did when he sinned in the garden.
Excuse me, I
Yeah.
see a comment from Matthew Henry says, when the crowd wanted to force a crown on Jesus' head, he withdrew.
Yep.
But when they come for him to give him a crown of thorns, he offers himself. I thought that was such
It's
a...
very profound, isn't it?
It is, yeah. But I didn't ever think about that maybe they thought that this was the time when Jesus was going to be.
Well, I think that's what the disciples think based on what's about to happen. Yeah. But maybe they think too, oh, there's going to be a revolution, even though Jesus keeps telling them there's not going to be. They seem to expect that's what's going to happen.
I'm jumping ahead, but Peter obviously had a
Yeah, he did. Yeah. All right, now before we get to Peter, what happens in verses 4 to 6?
Jesus asked who they were seeking, who they were looking for,
Mhm.
even though he knew the answer.
Yeah. And we know from the other gospel accounts that Judas shows them who he is because he kisses him on the cheek. But I think it's interesting that Jesus steps up and says, you know, who do you want? Again, just this indication, Jesus is not shrinking from any of this. He's not hiding behind the disciples. He's not saying, you know, oh, let me slip over here where they can't see me. Jesus is going straight forward toward the cross, and he's not shrinking from anything that's coming. So he just puts himself out and says, who is it that you want when he knows? And when they say Jesus of Nazareth, what does he say?
I am he.
I am he, and that phrase right there, we've seen it before, so it can be translated, I am he, or it is I, and that is a perfectly good translation. But there are only two words in Greek, and the words are I am. That's what Jesus says right here. Now, I probably wouldn't read a whole lot into that, except what happens when he says that.
They fell to the ground.
Yeah, that's so weird to me. I don't quite know what happened right there. But when you know that he said I am, and then you see them, the enemies falling down, I don't know, maybe there's a little foreshadow of like, everyone's going to bow before this king at some point, even though they don't believe in who he is. There's something that happens right there that indicates they are out of their league, and they should know it. They should know that the guy they're about to arrest, this is a big deal, what they're about to do. Maybe they're reacting better than they know when they do that.
And is the Sanhedrin and the Roman soldiers falling to the ground, is that in all the different apostles?
It's not in all of them. I don't know if it's in the others or not, or if it's just
Because
in
I
John.
don't remember it being in each of them.
It's not in all of them, and it might only be in John where he says that. I'm not sure. Yeah. All right, now, when that happens, then what does Jesus do next in 7 to 9? And I kind of thought, why does Jesus put that question to him again? But it's like putting an exclamation point on the fact that they should not be doing what they're doing. Like, it is. Yeah, it is. It's a second chance for them to be like, you know what, never mind. we shouldn't be doing this. But Jesus then adds, if he's the one they want, they should just let the disciples go. And why does he say that, according to verse 9? To fulfill the words he spoke. So these are words that he spoke back when he was talking to the Father about the sheep that had been given to him. And he said, I have not lost any of those that you gave me. He said this in conversation with the Father. And right here,
He's putting himself out and saying to them, let the disciples go, because he's going to keep them safe to the end. He's not going to lose any of those disciples that the Father has given to him. Now, all of these disciples are going to die, and they're going to die for him. But they haven't quite figured out what's going on yet. And the time for them hasn't come yet, and Jesus knows it. So he's making a point of protecting them when he puts himself forward. So all of this, again, he's fully in control. You don't get the sense in any of these events that Jesus is scared to death and trying to figure out what to do. And we know that he struggles with what's coming because we know the other gospel accounts of how he prays in the garden. But you don't get the sense at all that he's standing there thinking, okay, what do I do next? No, he knows exactly where he's going, what's required of him, what the Father has prepared for him, and he's headed straight into it.
And he's even doing it in a very, like, sacrificial way of offering, like, very gently, like they said the word, a lamb to be slaughtered.
Yeah.
You know, he's just letting, even encouraging, helping them, like leading them along almost, and giving, because he knows that's what he's doing, is giving himself in sacrifice.
Yeah, when I read this, I was thinking of Isaiah 53 and that description of the servant, like who goes like a lamb to the slaughter. Yeah. Okay, now, what does Peter do?
Start swinging.
Yeah. And how does the swinging go? I mean, what happens? Because this is a detail that's going to be important again in a minute.
Well, this one says, John says that he actually cut off this guy's ear.
Yeah, and not just either ear, the right ear, and he tells us who it is. That the guy is his name. He tells us his name, and that he's the servant of the high priest. Those are some interesting details. The kinds of details you would know if you've been an eyewitness and you saw it happen. That you would think, oh yeah, it was the right ear, and it was that guy. And I think, well, we'll get to this in a minute, but I think John has a connection to the high priest's house, because I think he's the other disciple who gets mentioned, who gets Peter into the courtyard. And if that's the case, then it would make sense that John notices this bit with the high priest servant, maybe even knows him. But Peter pulls out this sword, and he's either, I heard a pastor say once, he's either a really good swordsman or a really bad one. I don't know which it is, but yeah, cuts off his ear. What do you think Peter's doing right here? Why do you think Peter does this?
Macho.
Yeah.
All of Peter's actions tend to spring forth rather quickly right from his gut. He's a gut reactor, doesn't. But at least now, in his lifetime, he does not ever, I'll be that bold as to say ever, really process before he speaks. What do we say now? People speak without a filter.
Yeah.
He reacts. He's reactionary. He's just defensive. And plus, Jesus has been saying a lot of things to these disciples right now. And all of them have to be questioning and wondering what all this means. And so I would think everybody's, I don't know how to say it, everybody's a little on the edge at this point. I would think they know something's going to happen.
They're probably a little tightly wound at the moment.
Yeah, that's the way, that's what it is.
Is there a chance that it's a fishing knife? Do we know what kind? Because I think of Peter as a fisherman. I don't think of him as a swordsman.
There's some, I read some places where it could be translated as a dagger.
Oh.
So I'm not sure that it would be as small as, just a knife,
kind of.
but it might not be like a sword. It might be more like a short sword, like a dagger. That might be the case. I wonder if the disciples are expecting something like the chief priests and the officials are expecting. If they think that right here, there's going to be a battle, and Jesus is going to come out on top, and they're all in. Like okay, this is what we've been waiting for, and now Jesus is going to be the hero of the hour, and let's all jump in. And if it's, if you know you're on the winning side, and they're convinced they are, because they believe he's the Messiah, Why not jump into the battle and get glory, you know? I mean, here's where the glory is. Let's fight. I kind of get that sense like Peter's just caught up in the moment of thinking, okay, the battle's here and I'm all in. Let's get to it. Which is a really interesting contrast to what's going to come in just a few verses.
Yeah.
But here, when all the action is happening, Peter's like, let's fight. Because he's just not understood, and I think you're right, I think they're all pretty tightly wound at this point, but they have not yet understood what it is that Jesus has come to do. And the fact that a fight is not where this is all headed. What does Jesus say to Peter? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, what does he say? When,
Put your sword, put
Mhm.
your sword into its sheath.
yep.
And shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me?
Now that phrase, when he calls it the cup, is important because in the Old Testament, the cup that the Lord gives to people to drink represents judgment. It,
Represents what?
judgment. That cup is so often in the prophets about the wrath of God or the judgment of God. And so there's this idea that here is the Lord taking the cup that we deserve and handing it to the Son to drink. And the Son says, should I not drink it? I mean, when the Father gave it to me, should I not just drink the cup that he gave me? That's what he came for, and that's what he's going to do. And so this whole battle scene, this isn't going to happen because he's headed for drinking the cup. Okay, now what happens in 12 and 13?
The band of the soldiers arrested him and bound him. They led him first to Annas and then to Caiaphas.
Yeah. So, again, this is a multinational effort. It's the Romans and the Jews together. And we talked about this a while back, but Annas is basically the legitimate high priest, according to the Jews. But he got deposed because the Romans had a little beef with him. And so they made his son-in-law, Caiaphas, the high priest in his place. So that's why you get these two men who are here. They're both, in a sense, the high priest. But Annas is the one the Jews actually recognize as being the high priest, and Caiaphas is the one that the Romans recognize. So Annas brings him in to question him. What does John add right here about Caiaphas?
He was the one who said that, and it says that it was a prophecy that he didn't even realize was, that it was expedient for one man to die on behalf of the people.
Yeah.
And I never really understood that. But the other thing is, their being a high priest was not familial, was it? It didn't come down from father to son.
Well, it was supposed to.
Oh, it was supposed to?
Yes. I mean, it was
Oh.
supposed to go from father to son. And Annas had sons.
Oh.
So if there was going to be someone who succeeded him, it should have been his son, not his son-in-law.
Oh, okay.
But the Romans don't care. They chose Caiaphas because he was friendly to the Roman government.
Yeah. Doesn't really matter. But,
Yeah, yeah.
But how he prophesied this in,
Well, this was from chapter 11 after Lazarus was raised from the dead. So here's.
All the people were going after him and they said, well,
Yep.
what are we going to do?
Yep. Here's what Caiaphas said after the resurrection of Lazarus. Some of the people went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus has done. And then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we accomplishing, they asked. Here's this man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish. And then John says, he did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. Why do you think John throws this bit in here now in chapter 18? Just reminding you what Caiaphas said.
That's what's going to happen.
And if you know that background from chapter 11, it's hard not to read that and think, yep, God's got his plan, and it's headed right in the direction it's supposed to.
because we know that Caiaphas isn't about the atonement. He's just thinking we need a scapegoat to get us loose of the Roman government. But we already know, because John has told us, this is how God is going to provide atonement for the world, is he's going to use Jesus as the substitute. So here's John just telling us as we go along, everything is happening according to plan. All right, now what happens with Peter in 15 to 18?
They were following Jesus, and then they waited outside in the courtyard.
Mm-hmm.
And the other disciple, who is known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the servant, and they questioned him.
Yeah. And so this is the place where I think that other disciple who's not named, I think that's John. Because he's referred to himself in the third person before. And if it were anybody else, why not just name him? So I suspect that it's John who has the connection to the high priest, and so he gets Peter brought into the courtyard too. Now, they question Peter, but who is it specifically who questions Peter? Right here.
The servant girl.
Yeah, it's a servant girl. It's a girl who guards the door. That's scary, isn't it? I mean, think about there's a contrast right here, and I think it's intentional. This back and forth between Jesus and Peter, and all the gospel accounts do this. I think it's a way of portraying it as if there are two trials going on. There's one going on inside with Jesus, and there's one going on outside with Peter. Both of them are being questioned, but the outcome of that questioning is going to be completely different. So, we know Peter's outside being questioned by a servant girl about who he is and whether he's associated with Jesus. And what does he say?
I'm not.
I am not with him. Okay, now what do you think just happened between that fight with the sword a minute ago and what Peter's doing right here?
Fear is entering his heart.
What's that?
Fear has entered his heart.
Yep. When they're standing in a place where it looks like there's going to be a battle and glory and Jesus is going to be victorious, oh, he's all in. I would guess the disciples generally were all in. But now when Jesus has been arrested and it all looks like it's going south, now Peter's scared. And he's not only scared, he is ashamed to be associated with Jesus. So all that bravado of just a few verses ago is gone. And now it's not that somebody with power is putting pressure on him saying, maybe you need to go in with Jesus too. It's a servant girl who's like, wait, aren't you one of them? And he's like, no way. Oh, yeah, it's fear. And I wonder if maybe there's a bit of pride there too, just in thinking, if I get associated with him, who knows what's going to happen. But Peter's just like, no. Okay, now, while that's going on outside, what's going on inside in verse 19?
Questioning Jesus.
The high priest is questioning Jesus. Now, why would they need to question Jesus? Did they not know what he taught?
Jesus asked the same question.
Like, does Caiaphas not know who Jesus is or what he was teaching? Of course he does, because we already know from chapter 11 that he didn't like it, and they've already decided they're going to kill him. I mean, we know that when John makes that little mention of what Caiaphas said earlier, we also already have a foreshadow. This whole trial is a farce. They've already decided that they're going to make Jesus the scapegoat. So when they're sitting there questioning him, when the high priest is questioning him, it's not because they're trying to get to the truth. They're not actually trying to find out who Jesus is or what he taught. They're trying to make a pretense of making this trial look legitimate so that they can have him executed. Like, it's just whatever they need to do to railroad him. That's what they're going to do. So when they start questioning him, well, how does Jesus answer?
I have been open, and I've spoke openly with the world. So why do you ask me?
It's like Jesus hasn't been doing anything in a corner. And he just points that out to them, and they know it. It's like Jesus he's just not going to go along with this farce. There's no point in explaining to them what he's been teaching because they know it. And if they don't, there are plenty of people they can talk to who do. So he hasn't been teaching in secret. He's been teaching in the synagogues. He's been teaching at the temple. He's been teaching publicly all this time. For 3 years, he's been doing and saying everything publicly. And they know what he's been teaching because they've been giving him a hard time about it. You know, they keep coming to him and challenging him. And so it's just such a farce. And it's not just that it's like they don't know what he's been teaching. Think about this whole scene that's happening right here. Okay, what time of day is it? It's nighttime. Okay, so when do court cases typically happen? Not in the middle of the night, not on a holiday, it's still Passover, and not at the judge's house. Like there is a place to hold court, and it's not at the high priest's house. So the fact that they're doing it at night during the Passover at the high priest's house already tells you this is not a legitimate trial. And when I was reading about this, one of the commentators said, historically they also began, they began with witnesses for the defense. That's where you start, is by calling witnesses for the defense. There are no witnesses for the defense. They just start in on Jesus. Again, because they're not trying to get at the truth. They're not even, they're not trying to get at the truth.
They called witnesses who would lie about him.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting.
Exactly.
They call witnesses who will lie about the person.
Yeah. But nobody for the defense. And where are you going to find him in the middle of the night anyway? You know, it's like, yeah. But the whole trial, from beginning to end, they're railroading him, and Jesus isn't going to help him do it. So instead of going along with the questioning, he just is like, stop that. I mean, he calls them out on just the hypocrisy of what they're doing. And what's the response when he does that?
They struck him.
Yeah, there's an official who's standing right there and slaps him in the face. Why?
It's disrespectful
To
the inquiry.
To the high priest.
Yeah.
What's your impression of that?
And the high priest deserves this.
What did you say?
Yeah, every time I read this, it just kind of takes my breath away. Because think about the weight of what they're doing. They've got God on trial. And when God himself calls out their hypocrisy, they slap him. And they do it because he's being disrespectful to the high priest? No, he's not. He's calling out the hypocrisy of the high priest. The high priest, by the way, has already decided to have him killed, to kill the Messiah. They've got their Messiah on trial. But they care about how the high priest looks. The high priest is intended to point to the Messiah. He's supposed to be a picture of the Messiah. And the high priest and the Messiah are totally at odds. And it's not just that they're assaulting the defendant in court, which is bad enough, but the fact that, of who they're doing it to. It's really shocking that they're manhandling their Messiah, right?
You make a point of saying you did it with the palm of his hand. Everything is so important in all his words. Is there something in that?
Well, I think it's the kind of thing that you do to correct somebody. It's not,
Slugging.
yeah, it's not like he beats him up. It's
master subservient.
Yes.
thing.
And it's insulting.
An insult, a slap in the
Yes.
face.
Yeah.
Slap in the
It's not torture so much as it's an insult to say, to put somebody in their place. Yeah.
Well, my mother, she usually would slap us, if she thought she needed to.
Yeah.
But I talked back to her one time, told her something wasn't her business, and I got the back of her hand. Only the one time.
That was really bad.
Yes.
Yeah, well.
I keep thinking back to when Nicodemus said, aren't you going to give him a trial? Like maybe they're covering their backs there because they didn't give him a trial.
Yeah, I think they are. Well, whatever kind of trial it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they are trying to make it look legitimate what they're doing. All right, now, well, how does Jesus respond when they do that?
He responds, if what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong, but if what I said is right, why do you strike me?
Yeah, he just calls them out again. They don't care about the truth. And Jesus is making that very clear in the things that he's saying, that they don't care what the truth is as they're going through all of this questioning. Yeah, why slap him unless he said something that isn't true? But he's totally right. Everything he just said to the high priest was totally right. And they don't care.
Is that remember with self-defense? That was the only words that ever Jesus spoke about himself, wasn't it? Where he said, why do you hit me? I give you, Is it kind of a thing of self-defense? I mean, he doesn't need to do that.
I think it's a confrontation of their of this farcical trial.
Okay. The arrogance and
Because, when the official does that, if you didn't know better, you could look at that and think, oh, look how much he cares about the reputation of the high priest. You could think, oh, it's good for him to stand up to somebody who's being disrespectful to the high priest. Unless you know that this whole thing is a lie. This isn't about respect for the high priest. They don't care about the truth. And I think Jesus is just putting them on the spot by saying, yeah, you don't really care about that. Because if you did, you wouldn't be slapping me, you'd be dealing with what I just said. Okay, now while this is going on, what's happening outside?
Simon Peter had been warming himself.
Mm-hmm.
Standing around with guys.
That's right. And?
And one of them asks him, you are not also one of his disciples, are you?
And he says,
Oh, no.
nope. Okay, time number 2. And then what happens?
One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of Malchus, said, do I not see you in the garden with him?
What bad luck is that? And here's Peter standing there, and there's a guy who was actually there when Jesus was arrested, and he saw Peter cut the guy's ear off, and he's like, hang on, didn't my cousin just lose his ear to your lousy sword skills? I'm pretty sure I just saw that. And what does Peter say? Nope,
Nope.
wasn't me. Nope. That's right. And then the rooster crows, just as Jesus predicted it would happen. He
Can we
says,
have that again?
There's in the old King James it says, and the rooster crew. Is that funny? Instead of crowed, it says crew. That sounds so funny that the woman who read it the other day from her translation, she's like, I can't say that. So she reread it and said, and then the rooster cockadoodle dude.
Actually, crew is probably more
Crew. Past tense of crew.
descriptive of
Yeah. So here again, that Peter, we know from the other gospel accounts, at this moment, suddenly wakes up and realizes this is exactly what Jesus said would happen. But again, why include all of that detail? Because it shows who's in control. Because even while Jesus is sitting there, put on trial inside, and his disciples have abandoned him, he is still in control because all the little details are happening exactly the way he said they would.
And Jesus looked at him, right? There's apparently, because
One of them says he looks at him or in his direction or something like that. Yeah. And okay, now it's very interesting, this contrast between Jesus and Peter. Because Jesus is inside, and he's being questioned by the authorities, like the highest of the highest in the Jewish government. That's who's questioning him, the people who have the authority to hand him over to the Roman government. And he tells the truth, even when he knows what's going to happen on the other side of it. Here's Peter on the outside being questioned by the minions, and he's lying. I mean, these are people who don't have any power over him, but he's lying because he doesn't want to be associated with Jesus. It's not just that Jesus does what Adam didn't. Jesus does what Peter didn't. Jesus does what we didn't. Like, he is sitting there in the dock doing everything that we don't do.
He's obeying his Father. He's fulfilling the Father's will, even while his disciples are turning the opposite direction. Okay, now back to Jesus inside. What happens in 28 to 32?
They led him from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters
Yep.
early morning.
Keep going in 28.
They themselves would not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, and then could eat the Passover.
Oh my goodness.
So Pilate went outside.
Yeah. So Caiaphas sends him to Pilate, the Roman governor, and some translations say something like the palace or the praetorium. This is the headquarters of the Roman military in Jerusalem, which would have also been the governor's residence. But Pilate is a Gentile. And so if the Jews go into his house, if they go into the headquarters where all these Gentiles are, they risk becoming ceremonially unclean. And why do they care about that? Because it's Passover week. And so the Passover meal has been eaten, but there are still there's other meals to come that are all part of this week-long celebration of the unleavened bread and all that. So here they are. Well, what's your impression of that? That they won't go inside because they don't want to become defiled.
It's very stuck up, snobby, hoity-toity.
It's what they've been doing all along, following the rules, and, they're safe in their rule keeping, and they're ignoring the truth.
Which rules do they keep?
Their own,
Yeah.
the ones that they've made up.
Because they're breaking a really big one right here. They're about to execute an innocent man.
Right.
Like they've just railroaded a guy they know is innocent, and they're trying to kill their Messiah. But when they come to the Roman governor, what they're worried about is the ceremonial uncleanness. They're worried about the stuff on the outside. They're going to hand over their Messiah to be crucified, and then they're going to go carry on with Passover like usual. The hypocrisy is just breathtaking, but that's what we've seen all over John, is that in other places he calls them whitewashed tombs. Yeah, that's right. Because they make a pretense of keeping the law by following all this stuff on the surface, but actually it's a cover for the evil that's underneath it. They're doing something so evil, but they look good on the surface because they're like, yeah, but we don't want to become ceremonially unclean. So Pilate comes outside and he asks them, okay, what are the charges against Jesus? I assume that Pilate knows something about them arresting him because he had to give them the authority to take a detachment of Roman soldiers to go get him. But historically, we know Pilate and the Jews didn't get along very well. And this kind of tension between him and the Jews is going to be obvious through the next couple of chapters. So he goes out, he wants to know the outcome of the trial, and why should he get involved? And how did the Jews answer him?
They don't really answer the question. They say, if he were not a criminal, he would not have handed him over to you.
It's kind of like saying, well, he's just trust us that he's guilty and be done with it. Like, they don't have a good charge. Okay, now, if you know, John doesn't spell this out as clearly as the other gospel accounts did, but let's just talk about this. What's the charge that they bring against him themselves within the Sanhedrin? What is he guilty of? Do you know what do they say he's guilty of?
Saying that he was God.
Yeah, blasphemy. So for the Jews, the charge is blasphemy. That's what he's guilty of according to how they understand their law, or how they're using their law. But blasphemy doesn't get very far with the Romans. And they actually want Jesus to be executed. They don't just want him to be beaten or flogged or whatever. They want him to be executed, and the Jews don't have the authority to execute people. That doesn't mean they never did. They did stone some people to death when they shouldn't have. But they don't have authority in capital cases. So it has to be the Roman government who passes a sentence of execution. So in order to get the Romans to take this seriously, like blasphemy isn't going to do it. The Romans don't care about blasphemy under the Jewish law. Do you know what they accuse him of to the Romans in order to get him executed?
He's trying to take over, he's trying to be king.
Yeah, that he claims to be a king. That's the charge they bring, because that means he's guilty of treason.
that would put him on the wrong side of the emperor, and treason is a crime worthy of execution under Roman law. So, we worked this all out from the other gospel accounts, but right here you just see the Jews bringing Jesus, and they don't have a good answer for what the charge is. It's just like, he's guilty, and please take care of it. How does Pilate answer them?
Well, he asked them about where his kingdom is.
Yeah. And even before that, he's like, go deal with it yourselves. Right? Because obviously this is an internal Jewish matter, and he's just like, just deal with it yourselves. But they can't. Well, they can, but they don't want to, because they want Jesus to get executed. And what's really interesting is that it's not just any form of execution they want. What's the kind they want? They want crucifixion. And crucifixion was brutal enough that it was actually not used on Roman citizens. It could only be used on other people, like the Jews. And typically they hated it because it was so brutal. But they are intentionally accusing him of something that they know will get him crucified. Not just executed, but crucified. Why does that matter in verse 32?
Because
It's a fulfillment of prophecy, isn't it? He'll be lifted up like Moses lifted up the serpent.
That's right. And Jesus has been saying this. He's said this multiple times in John, that the way he would die would be to be lifted up. So even though you see all this political intrigue happening, in order to get him executed this way, what John reminds us of is there's a bigger plan. The crucifixion, it's not that he's going to get hung. It's not that he's going to get shot. Well, shot, I don't know. Did they shoot people then? But probably not. But the point is that he's going to be crucified, and that is part of the plan of God, that he will be lifted up. The specific form of execution falls within the purposes of God.
I keep thinking of our son, who has been into conspiracies since he was a little kid. And something you said, actually through teaching in the winter time, I just think of the champion conspirators of God. He mastered, because of Eric, because of what he deal with Eric, it's like, Eric says, look at this covenant. Think of the way God has manipulated everything. If that's not conspiracy, but it's just, he does it in such finite detail.
Yeah.
It's like, how could you deny the plan?
Yeah. It's all very orchestrated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, now then, Nanette, what does Pilate say?
are you king of the Jews?
And how does Jesus answer that?
Very cryptically. Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?
Yeah, so this is the charge the Jews are bringing against him, that he claims to be the king of the Jews, and that would make him a threat to the emperor. But Jesus is so interesting when he's like, are you just passing that along, or should we have a conversation about what you really think? It's so interesting that, again, there's no fear with Jesus in the way that he interacts with Pilate. And do you notice how the prisoner just suddenly became the interrogator right here? Mm-hmm. You get this sense that Jesus can take control of this conversation any minute. He can just do exactly what he wants right here. He could snap his fingers and make anything happen that he wants to. And he's challenging the Roman governor, not challenging him in that he's, doing anything wrong yet, but challenging him about who do you think I am? Do you think I am the king of the Jews? And if you do, why do you think that? How does Pilate answer? At 35.
Am I a Jew?
Mm-hmm.
Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?
Pilate's just repeating the charge. He's not particularly interested in Jesus. He's just trying to deal with this problem that the Jews have handed to him, and wants to know what he did wrong. How does Jesus answer him?
My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews.
Yeah, so Jesus just went back to the original question. He is indeed a king, but his kingship is totally different from what Pilate is thinking about. if he were a regular revolutionary, there would have been a fight out in the garden. But he's not, because his kingship isn't from here, which of course means he's not a threat to Rome. He's not the kind of threat that the Jewish leaders are making him out to be. Now, it's very interesting that this is the charge that they bring against Jesus, that he's the king of the Jews, or he claims to be the king of the Jews. Well, what's the irony in that?
Well, they end up putting the INRI on the cross.
Yeah, they're going to put that over his head when he gets crucified, that he's the king of the Jews.
What difference does that make? They're still under the Romans, so it doesn't matter if he's the king of the Jews, does it?
Do they think he's the king of the Jews?
Well, the Jews are rejecting him.
Yeah, they don't think he's their
want him
king.
to be their king.
But is he the king of the Jews?
Well, he's king in the kingdom of, he's king of heaven. So he's
That's right.
king of everything.
He is the king of the Jews. He's just not the king they want. And they're saying he claimed to be the king of the Jews, but he didn't. I remember all through the book of John, he has intentionally been avoiding language where he claims to be the king, even where he claims to be the Messiah. Not because he isn't, but because he knows they will misunderstand. He knows he's not the kind of king they want. So he's purposely never described himself in those terms. But that's what they're accusing him of when they bring charges against him. And so here he is, absolutely the king of the Jews. He's the king of the Romans too. They don't know it, but he is. But the kind of kingship that he's talking about and the kind of kingship they're talking about are not at all the same thing. I mean, he's a bigger king than they can possibly imagine. Yeah. Now, when he says that, I mean, makes it clear he's not a threat to Rome. But then what does Pilate say in 37?
Are you a king?
He latches onto this, and I kind of wonder if he's being a little sarcastic. When Pilate says this, I wonder if he's just like, "Oh, you're a king, are you?" Like, because here's Jesus sitting there in front of him, completely helpless. What kind of king is he if he's being questioned by Pilate? But how does Jesus answer him?
You say that I am a king.
Yeah.
For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth.
And then what does he add right there at the end?
Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice.
So he doesn't affirm or deny that he's a king, which I think is because he is the king, but he's not the kind of king that Pilate means. But he says very clearly the reason he came into the world is not to lead the Jews against Rome. The reason he came into the world is to testify to the truth, to be the revelation to the world about who God is. That's how his kingdom spreads. It doesn't spread by military power. It spreads by this revelation of God. And everyone on the side of truth listens to Jesus and believes him. And I wonder if right there he's poking Pilate a little bit. I wonder if he's just saying, so what are you going to do about this? You know, if you're on the side of truth, you're going to listen to me. So I don't know. I think maybe there's just a little invitation to Pilate right here to get on the right side of things. How does Pilate respond?
What is truth?
He'd make a good American, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
When he's like, what is truth? Like, what does that even mean? I mean, he's not going to get into that kind of conversation with Jesus. He's not interested in the truth. I think he's interested in what's, politically going to be the best thing to do. But he very clearly knows that Jesus is innocent. Whatever's going on here, he's not worthy of being executed. Because what does he do next?
He tells that to the Jews. I don't find any fault in
Yeah, goes back outside and says there's no basis to charge him. But he doesn't stop there. He could have just dismissed the whole thing right there, but I think he's trying to maintain peace with the Jews and at the same time not execute a man he knows is innocent. Because then what does he say?
You have a custom that I can release one man to you.
So during the Passover, this was the custom that the Roman government would allow during this Passover feast for the Jews to choose one prisoner to be released. So here I think is Pilate saying, well, we could both have, we could both save face right here. I could just let him go, So then he was technically a prisoner, but, he doesn't get executed. So I don't execute an innocent man, and, you get it, whatever. Does it work? Why not?
Well, it's how it's come.
Yeah.
But I just be counting that, if like, so they're gonna execute an innocent man, swap him
Yep.
for the one that's not guilty, swap the not guilty for the guilty.
Yeah. Swap him for a guy who actually was involved in a rebellion, who actually did come with weapons and try to attack the government.
They had to call them, I would think, right, to make that swap?
I don't know. Like, because they don't even think about it. When Pilate says, should I release Jesus? Well, he calls him the King of the Jews, and I think Pilate's needling the Jews right there when he says that. But he's like, do you want me to release the King of the Jews? And their immediate response is like, no, we want Barabbas instead. We want the rebel. We'd rather have him back. That's such an interesting swap, not only because it shows the hypocrisy of the Jews, but because there is in it a picture of our salvation. That Jesus takes the place of the man who's guilty, which is what he's doing through the whole story for us. That he's not the rebel, he takes the place of the rebels. This is what he does according to Isaiah 53, that he takes the place of the guilty. All right, I'm going to stop there. Comments? Anything you want to add?
It just reminds me so much of what our society, not we, does today, is that they would rather let, wrongdoers go, and, people who've done heinous crimes, like they get to walk free again, that they get out, where when they just, put any, kind of truth or witness to the truth just under the bus all the time. They just turn their backs to it. They hate it with their heart. They hate it so much. And anybody that is on that side, they'll just do anything they can to kill it.
Yeah. I thought the same when I read this. Not much has changed, has it? People are the same. All right.